Hello and welcome to another episode of Metal Effort. My name's Nehemiah and today we're going to be talking about this piece of metal, the WE Knives Drakon. This is on loan from one of my viewers, Sean. He's SF Knife Guy on Instagram if you want to give him a follow. Thank you, Sean, for lending this along. This is a integral knife. So this is 2 integral knives in like 2 weeks. So that's new for the channel. I think I've only reviewed 3 total, counting this one. This is a really interesting knife, so I'm excited to give it a review. Let's do a quick comparison here. We've got a PM2, we've got our Para 3, and you'll notice it's, roughly the same size as the PM2. As far as the blade length, they're very similar. It's 3.45 inches to the heel. Cutting edge, there's a little choil right there, is 3.125. So it's a good medium-sized knife, right in the middle, I think, for the average knife size, which is good. I like medium-sized knives. I think they are probably the most practical in terms of the kind of cutting they can do and how easy it is to hold. So this has potential as far as the size is concerned. Let's get some new comparisons in here. I've got a Booze Blades Smoke, which is also made by WE. There's actually a lot of similarities in these knives, even though they have different opening apertures and are different. It's not integral, for instance. But for some reason, these 2 knives just constantly remind me of themselves. So the other integral I was referring to is the Spyderco Peasant. I want to call it Peasant because that's what you are after you buy it. So this is your size comparison. Really interesting knife. Definitely a distinct visual flair to it. So this one will be good to know how it all pans out. Let's do a quick weigh-in. This is a pretty important aspect for an integral knife. It's really difficult. In fact, I don't even know if one has any internal milling on. It's hard to see. Maybe let me get a flashlight and see. Woo! Look at all that dust. All right, so you've got no internal milling because this is, milled out entirely from a chunk of titanium. And so it would be a very sophisticated machine indeed that could mill it out and then reach in and actually mill some pockets into this for weight reduction. I'm sure it's physically possible. I just don't know if anybody is willing to make that attempt. You'd have to make a completely different kind of machine and it would cost a lot of money. Probably not worth it. So without further ado, this is the weight. Under 4 ounces, 3.8. That's okay, actually. It's a little bit over an ounce an inch, but considering how beefy, just a chunk of titanium is, that's not that bad. For the Paisan, just for comparison, this is a much longer blade. I was actually pleasantly surprised with the Paisan as well. So both are just a little bit over their ounce an inch mark, but that's good. That's solid. There's knives that usually like 2 full ounces bigger than the ounce an inch, and those are harder to defend in terms of carryability. So that's good to know. With the objective stuff out of the way, let's get into the dent, the decent, the excellent, the nitpicks, and the terrible of this piece of metal. First off, in the decent is this very distinctive blade shape. It kind of reminds me of like the bird designs from Spyderco, with the eye hole just being like an angry bird swooping down for its prey. You got this weird like fuller thing that's also like a swedge, which is kind of unique. That's weird. Usually I'm kind of against fullers unless they have a very practical purpose or wide enough that it's easy to clean. And I guess this satiates that you're not going to get too much stuck in here without the ability to just kind of wipe it out. And it's not the full length. I mean, once you get to this point, it's basically a swedge from that point on, basically. So very unique. Another thing you'll notice is you got this really extending bevel. So it's almost like a micro bevel back here. And then just the geometry of the blade, keeping that same angle on the grind, it just creates this really large bevel. So this is from a subjective point of view, kind of take it or leave it. I don't know how I feel about it, to be honest. I think if I tried to sharpen this and do a mirror polish, I'd probably be okay with this part. except for the recurve. We'll talk about that later. This part might be really difficult to get like a perfect flat mirror finish on both sides, I would guess. I don't know. Obviously, I'm not going to do that with this person's knife, but that would be either really awesome if it would be easy for me to mirror polish that entire bevel. If it was difficult, then I'd be incredibly frustrated because it would make it look much uglier. So, yeah, that's the dilemma. So the finish on the blade is stonewash. I think it's tactfully done. I think the stonewash finish matches with the kind of bronze anodizing type stuff that's going on over here pretty well. I think, you know, if you did like a high mirror polish or something like that, it would contrast a little bit too much with what's going on back here. But ultimately, the blade it's thin, blade stock, relatively thin behind the edge. The finger choil is just good enough to get your finger in there. It's not particularly comfortable as a finger choil goes, but you can do it if you needed to. I found myself not using the finger choil unless I was, you know, cutting something that kept falling into the choil, which is kind of annoying when that happens. So, you know, if it's something that's not super aggressive, like just paper or cardboard, I'll usually put my knuckle there. But otherwise, I was doing, you know, in the food prep stuff, I was back here. So, yeah, I mean, ultimately, it's a decent blade. It's definitely got its unique quirks. I don't think this is any amazing, like, innovation to put it in the excellent, so I'm keeping it here. Next thing I want to mention is just that weight for the integral. Now, that weight is decent, but it's not the most perfectly, like, balanced blade. I mean, balance is, like, back here, which is pretty far back. That's a little weird, but yeah, you can see. So in the pocket, it's good. It's fine for the weight. The clip is relatively deep carry. It's not super duper deep carry, but better than like if they did the 2 screw thing. I just reviewed a knife where it was 2 screws here and it didn't need to be. I think they could have done this option. And I'm glad that they didn't favor the lanyard hole and put this like below it or anything like that. So that was solid. Ultimately, carrying it was pretty good. It was fine. It's top heavy in the pocket, which is okay. You know, that's not going to matter too much. Once you get it in the hand, the weight distribution can kind of be an issue, but those are kind of 2 separate points. I took this knife apart when I got it from Sean. It was pretty heavily misaligned down here. It was not, this is not centered still, but it was much worse. It was favoring the clip side even more. Took it apart, gave it a clean, put it back together. The pivot, I think it was just misaligned on the shelf. There's a little shelf, so it's a non-free spinning pivot. And so aligning that, I think, kind of jostled things in the right place a little bit better. So you want to be careful with that. If it's really, really off center, take it apart and just see what's going on. The pro here is that it's very easy and quick to take apart the knife. This part screws out, and then there's this like little, you can kind of see the line right there, kind of an egg shape that comes out, and that's where they inserted the stop pin and then covered the stop pin with that like little milling pattern. So you just unscrew that, and then the whole blade and the bearings just come out. Really easy to just, you know, get a cotton swab and clean it out, do the normal stuff, put it back together. It was easy peasy. It didn't perfectly fix the centering issue, but it did make it a little bit better and improve the action a little bit more too. So that's good. Next thing we want to talk about is just this milling pattern. I think this is obviously the most striking part of the knife. The kind of dragon scale thing that's going on. That's like perfect timing for Game of Thrones stuff going on. Maybe I'll get a little bit closer here just so you can see what's going on. The detailed work on this is extensive. And remember, if they mess up, they have to grab a whole nother block of titanium and then do it all over. Now you'll see here, there's a steel lock bar insert. And because they have to mill the lock bar and try to get the steel insert in there without being able to take the knife apart, because it's one solid piece, they decided to just put it on the outside and kind of puzzle piece it together. And then obviously you can't anodize steel. So it's a little bit of a color contrast that kind of makes it look weird, but I understand why they had to do this. Usually you would put the steel stuff kind of on the inside of the knife. Do I have a good example of? Yeah, here's a good example. So this is the Koenig Arius, and they can put the steel insert on the inside and have the titanium on the outside, but obviously I can take the knife apart and get in onto that side. You can't do that with integrals, so that's their solution. Otherwise, it would just be a titanium, which wouldn't be the end of the world, but there'd probably be some lock stick, and WE has a reputation to uphold, so that's probably why they didn't want to do that. So really well done on the milling. I think they did a good job as far as figuring out some of the problems of like, how do we hide the stop pin? How do we do the steel lock bar insert? And I think they made decent choices in getting those done without compromising too much of the practicality of the knife. Next thing is the ergonomics, and I like the ergos in some ways and then really don't in others. So I'm putting it in the decent here. So what I do like is that it's a very contoured, rounded feel. More than I think any other blade I've ever had that's a folding knife, this feels the most like a fixed blade. Just the rounding of it in the hand, if it wasn't for the clip, would feel just kind of like a Bark River knife, really. It's that rounded. Fills the hand pretty good for such a small handle. The issue is that the clip is pretty hot spotty. It's rounded, so it's not like, cutting you, or it's not too sharp, but it's really tall, and it's just right in the middle. And so if you want to bear down on it at all, it's just kind of jabbing you real good. That is really unfortunate, because I felt like if it just had gone down a little bit, angular, I think it would have still been easy to get it into your pocket, but maybe not be so offensive in the hand. So if it wasn't for the clip, this would be probably an excellent, but because of that, I have to ding it quite a bit. Otherwise, for short-term use, it's not an issue. Usually you don't need to bear down that hard. You can kind of be ginger with the knife. If you choke up, it's less of a problem because it's back here instead of like right there, which hurts a little bit more. So if you're here, it's okay. If you're here, it's annoying. It's pretty bad. Ultimately, I'm going to put the fit and finish in the decent. I'm pretty sad that it's not centered, even after I finagled it to get it a little bit more centered. Everything else, though, is pretty good. There's not really any imperfections on the milling that I could find. The anodizing is really spot on. Gives it that really rustic kind of, fantasy knife type look. The black on the top and how it kind of fades over to the anodizing, like, that's all really well done. They definitely, paid attention to the finish and cared about the knife in that way. So good job. Next, let's get into the excellent. I have one thing in the excellent. It's a trifecta. It's the action. So we're going to go through OCD, open, close, disengage, and talk about the different aspects of the action. So for opening, you have two options here. Obviously, you've got a flipper tab. Flipper tab is excellent. This is a really, really good flipper tab. It's got enough for the light switch. The push button is not super good, but it's all right. And they did a little kind of flat notch right here to kind of help you with the push button, so it's not just jabbing directly into your finger. So they designed it to be able to do both light switch and oops, I just strapped it there. Light switch and the push button. And both work equally well and are pretty comfortable. And then you have the opening aperture. So this is kind of good news, bad news. For good news, it opens up really, really well. I like the chamfering that they got. I thought the hole looked a little small. I was a little worried that it'd be awkward or wouldn't grab onto my finger. But for me, personally, I don't know. Here, okay. The meat of my finger right here just grabs right on. And I have not slipped off of that, I don't think, one time. It just perfectly grabs without being sharp. This is something I would be curious to see if Spyderco could do, especially where you have the transition of the grind. It's kind of sharp right there. If you could just, do a really deep chamfer all the way around, I wonder if that might, give it a little bit more grab, something like this. But really pleased with this. The downside that I'll just mention is you can't do it lefty. The way that the detent is, it's just when I'm pushing this way on the blade, that's helping the detent ball get out of its hole. But if I'm pushing on the blade this way toward the detent ball, I'm like pinning the knife shut. So it's really hard to do it left-handed. It just does not want to come loose. Similarly, if you are using it right-handed and you want to do like a Sabenza open, it's pinning the knife down. Like it's hard to avoid the lock bar when you're doing that, but even if you properly avoid the lock bar, it's just not going to come open if you're going to try to do the Sabenza open. So you got to do the spider flick. If you do, it works perfect, but there are some limitations with the hole. It doesn't do everything. So that's something to note. On the Disengage, I've got a lot of good news here. This is basically perfect. This is what I want. I want there to be a little bit of a groove down here on the left scale to give you some horizontal access to that lock bar. That gives me, a way to not have to jam my finger in and then use my little meat that is in between, move horizontally instead of moving the entire thumb where I want it to go and be able to push up toward the top where I have the most leverage if I want to. Obviously with the steel bar, lock bar insert, there's no lock stick whatsoever, and the detent ball gets onto the tang of the blade extremely quick and easy, so you don't have that ledge that you have to get over. It's there a little bit, but it's so early that that's a part of the initial disengage, and then you're ready to swing it shut. So disengage is like perfect, basically. That's exactly what I want out of a knife. Super comfortable. I could do it over and over and over again. For the close, this is the weakest of the three. Again, when I first got it, I think it just needed a cleaning. You can get it down in one sweeping, kind of medium-powered jostle, maybe 2 on average if you're doing normal ones, I suppose, or 1 hard one. So it's not super guillotine shut, but of the 3, aspects, it doesn't need to be guillotine shut to be good. If the detent ball is getting on the tang of the knife and I can close it, that's enough. Like I can whip that around. I can go through the whole. That's focusing on the wrong parts here. So I can go through the whole 3 things pretty quick. I can do the marathon of doing the fidgeter, routine, I suppose. And some knives, like I recently reviewed this. No, different knife. I haven't reviewed this yet, but. Opening is great, disengage is garbage, and then the close is kind of a pain in the neck, and so I just don't want to use this knife. Even though everything else about the knife is great. If a knife can do the 3, open, close, disengage, and it's fun to do all 3, it goes into another echelon of knives I like. That can make up for a lot, personally. Now, some people, they're not buying the knife as a fidget toy, and they're more about, the utility of it. But honestly, if you're watching this video and you're to this point, you probably care more about just utility. The look of it, the fact that it's a integral knife. Like, if these things are interesting to you, if you can have these things that are kind of unique and have really good action, that's very compelling. So that's definitely in the favor of the knife. With that out of the way, let's talk about the nitpicks. I've kind of mentioned some of these along the way. The issue with the lefties opening it with the spidey flick is a thing. It's even more of an issue that you can't put the clip on the left side. So that's going to be basically, bad news bears for the lefties. But, such is the life of being in the knife hobby and being left-handed, you poor souls. Next thing is the centering that I mentioned earlier. I doubt this is going to be on all of them. So you can kind of just play the roulette, buy it from your reputable place. Or if you buy it online, make sure they have good pictures of the centering if that's important to you. Otherwise, you could return it if you buy it from one of the retailers. This is something that, some people are picky on, some people are not. My Pison is not perfectly center. It's probably off by the same percentage. And it bothers me, but not enough to get rid of the knife and get another one. some people consider this centered. I showed it to Nick Shabazz, and he's like, that's pretty much centered. And I was like, oh, okay, well, I disagree. But I was like, because I think of centering as literally centered, maybe with a 1% wiggle room. But that just goes down to personal preference. So I just want to be really upfront with what the centering is. Maybe you care, maybe you don't, but it's my job to be as critical as possible. So that's definitely showing up here. I don't know to what extent it's showing up on the other ones. I also mentioned how back heavy it is. This doesn't matter too much to me. I'm not really a stickler for a knife being super duper, well balanced. I'm pleased when it is, but this is pretty off balance. It's gonna be obvious. It's a huge section that you're of weight that you're adding to the back of it. You've got the clip all back here, so gravity, leverage, it's all working against you. But that's kind of par for the course for integrals, so that's not a surprising aspect of the knife, but it's something you should be aware of if you care about that kind of thing. Last thing I have to mention in the nitpick, and this is totally subjective as well, is just the look of it. I think people are going to kind of love this or hate this. It looks kind of like a fantasy knife. I could see some people looking at this and be like, wow, this is like, a really nice, expensive knife. And then other people look at it and be like, bro, did you get that at the gas station? So I could see it going both ways. Kind of is what it is. Either you like it or you don't. If you like it and you have mean friends that are going to make fun of you when they see it, then, you just got to be ready for that, man. You got to toughen up. So, or woman. Last nitpick, again, I've mentioned this earlier, is this very minor recurve. And at first I didn't even notice the recurve, but it's definitely there. It's, it's curving up to this point right here. That's kind of annoying. Again, I would be very hesitant to mirror polish, sharpen this knife. I think I would have a lot of issues. I don't know if I would be able to, in my current experience, sharpen this without just completely knocking down the back of this on my flat stones, just accidentally. And then I don't know how easy it would be achieved to get this huge bevel up here evenly polished without making boo-boo mistakes. So that aspect of the blade really kind of freaks me out. I think, depending on the kind of cutting you're doing, if it's not super duper hard use, if you're just strapping it up when you need to and you're worried about it, you could send it out to get sharpened professionally. That those are things you can do to make it work. For me personally, that's pretty annoying for sure. For the terrible section, I don't have anything terrible to say, so let's move into the conclusion. The conclusion is, I like this knife a lot more than I thought I was going to. I didn't realize until I got the knife that it had a recurve. That was the biggest surprise in a negative way. I was pleasantly surprised in the action. Action is fantastic. He was saying that the close was pretty bad. I think it's perfectly fine considering that both the open and the open and the disengage are so good. I'm kind of willing to put up with the, not guillotine shut. I think that's fine. I think for me personally, the recurve is going to be a deal breaker. I think, unfortunately, if you don't care about that, and like I said, you're willing to send it out, I think this is a really compelling knife. Otherwise, I think that, the thin blade stock, the ergos are okay, again, limiting, how you hold it and stuff like that. It could be a really good knife for somebody, I think. It's medium size, medium weight, so I don't think it's going to be really offensive in the EDC world. So that there's something to be said of just, is this attractive enough to you to kind of overlook these nitpicks? I am really aggressively against recurves. So for me, that's a deal breaker, but I don't want to dump on the knife just for that one small thing, because if it's, everything else that it's kind of offering us is pretty compelling, I think, overall. I hope this was helpful to you. I'll catch you in the next one. Bye.